The arrival of the apex predators. It started on an ordinary day, with no warning, no signs of what was to come. The sun was shining bright, and the world was going about its daily business. People were at work, children were at school, and the streets were filled with the usual hustle and bustle of life. But then, it happened. High above Earth, something massive was coming. A fleet of enormous ships entered the atmosphere, their dark shapes blocking out the sun as they descended from the sky. The ships were unlike anything humanity had ever seen. They were sleek and intimidating, with sharp edges and glowing symbols that no one could understand. The air grew heavy with the feeling of dread as the ships began their slow descent toward Earth's surface. At first, people thought it was just another military exercise or some kind of space exploration. But then the first reports came in. It wasn't just one ship. It was dozens scattered across different parts of the world. Panic set in. People turned on their TVs and checked their phones, hoping for some kind of explanation. What they saw instead were terrifying images. The ships had landed in cities, forests, deserts, and even mountains. And inside those ships were creatures unlike anything anyone had ever imagined. The apex predators had arrived. These creatures were enormous, towering beasts that moved with terrifying speed. They had sharp claws, jagged teeth, and eyes that glowed with an unnatural light. They were predators in the purest sense, built for one thing: to hunt, to kill, and to dominate. The soldiers, the governments, and the people of Earth didn't know what to do. The creatures were invincible. No weapons could hurt them. Tanks, fighter jets, and advanced missiles did nothing but anger the predators. They tore through cities, destroying everything in their path, leaving only ruins behind. In the first few hours, the world watched in horror as the predators moved across the Earth, leaving death and chaos in their wake. News stations played on a loop, showing the destruction and the helplessness of humanity. The military tried to fight back, but they were powerless. The predators didn't even flinch. They didn't need weapons or armor. Their natural strength was enough to rip through anything that came their way. By nightfall, the panic had turned into terror. Governments around the world tried to reach out to one another, but communication systems were being destroyed faster than they could send messages. It was as if the world was falling apart in front of their eyes, and there was nothing anyone could do to stop it. In the middle of all this chaos, there was one small, quiet hope. It was a message that spread through social media and whispered through the streets, a rumor that perhaps, just perhaps, there was a way to survive. Some scientists, hidden in the underground bunkers, had discovered something. These apex predators weren't just mindless killing machines. They had patterns. They had weaknesses. They weren't invincible. But who would believe it? The world was already gripped by fear, and the idea of using science to fight back seemed almost laughable. The creatures were unstoppable. The governments, military leaders, and civilians had no choice but to accept what seemed like the inevitable. Humanity was facing its extinction. Then, a strange thing happened. One of the apex predators, in the middle of its rampage, stopped. It froze. A human soldier, injured and weak, watched in disbelief as the beast simply stood still, staring at him with cold, glowing eyes. It didn't attack. It didn't move. It just watched. For a moment, the two were locked in an eerie standoff. And then, just as suddenly as it had arrived, the predator turned and walked away. That moment, that brief pause in the chaos, gave humanity something they hadn't had for hours: hope. Could it be that the creatures weren't entirely invincible? Could there be a way to control them, to find some kind of weakness? It was a thought that would fuel the next steps in the struggle for survival. As the night grew darker and the world continued to fall into disarray, small pockets of resistance began to form. People began to talk about the creature that had hesitated, the one that hadn't destroyed everything in its path. Was there a chance, or was it simply a fluke? Nobody knew for sure. But one thing was certain: If humanity was to survive, they would need to find a way to understand these apex predators before it was too late. Meanwhile, the predators continued their relentless assault. They moved with precision and purpose, almost as if they were following orders. But what were their orders? Who had sent them? And why? Questions that would remain unanswered for now. All that humanity knew was this: they had to fight. And they had to fight smart. The predators may have been unstoppable, but humans had always found a way to survive against the odds. They couldn't give up now. And so, the battle began. Not with guns or bombs, but with minds that refused to accept defeat. The world was on the brink of annihilation, but somewhere deep inside, a spark of hope remained. And that spark would be the only thing that could light the way forward. The arrival of the apex predators was only the beginning. Now, humanity had to learn how to fight back. And as the world waited for the next move, one question echoed in the minds of every person on Earth. Could they turn the tide, or were they doomed to become nothing more than prey? Humanity's last stand had begun, and it was nothing like the movies. There were no heroic speeches, no quick fixes, and certainly no easy victories. The truth was much grimmer. Cities were in ruins, communication was fractured, and the world was teetering on the edge of collapse. People hid in bunkers, hoping the storm would pass. But the storm wasn't just any storm. It was a relentless force of nature, one that couldn't be outrun or outlasted. With each passing hour, the apex predators continued to wreak havoc. It wasn't just their size or power that made them terrifying. It was the cold efficiency with which they carried out their mission. No emotion, no mercy. They hunted for sport and for survival, and humanity was nothing but prey. The predators tore through cities, destroyed military installations, and ripped through the very heart of human civilization. The military was the first to fight back, of course. Generals and commanders rallied their forces, and the world's armies united in a desperate attempt to defend their homelands. Fighter jets soared into the sky, and tanks rolled into the streets. But every effort to fight back was met with failure. The predators seemed impervious to any weaponry. Bullets bounced off their thick hides like raindrops. Explosions barely fazed them. They were simply too powerful, too fast, and too smart for any conventional weapon to handle. One by one, the world's greatest forces were crushed. The chaos spread like wildfire. Cities that had once been symbols of human achievement, places like New York, Paris, Tokyo, were reduced to burning rubble. The governments of the world fell into disarray, unable to coordinate any kind of effective response. There was no plan, no backup strategy, just survival. As the days dragged on, the situation grew worse. The leaders of the world tried to make sense of what was happening. Why were these creatures attacking? Who had sent them? But no answers came. It was as if the apex predators had appeared out of nowhere, with no explanation or warning. Were they simply doing what they were born to do, hunt and kill? Or was there something more? Was there a reason behind the invasion? Or was it all part of a greater scheme that humanity couldn't possibly understand? Then came the realization that shook everyone to their core. They weren't just here to kill. They were here to eradicate humanity. The predator attacks weren't random or disorganized. They followed a pattern. They targeted the most populated cities first, hitting the heart of human civilization. They didn't just wipe out military targets. They hunted civilians. Their actions made it clear. Humanity was their prey, and they were on a mission to eliminate them all. Fear turned to panic as the realization spread. The global leaders who had once promised to protect their people were now powerless, cowering in their bunkers, unable to provide any sort of leadership. No one knew what to do. No one had any answers. The human race had been caught completely off guard by an enemy it couldn't possibly hope to defeat. But amidst the growing despair, something unexpected happened. A small group of scientists, hidden away in a secure underground lab, made an important discovery. They noticed a pattern in the way the apex predators moved. They weren't random. They were organized, and that meant one thing: there had to be a way to stop them. One of the scientists, a young woman named Dr. Elena Martinez, spent hours poring over data and ancient texts, looking for a clue, any clue, that might reveal a weakness in the predators. Finally, after days of research, she stumbled upon something. An old legend, one that spoke of creatures much like the apex predators, existed in various cultures across the world. The legends described creatures that were vicious, but not invincible. They had weaknesses, psychological, emotional, and even physical. Could these predators be the same? Could they be tamed, controlled? At first, the idea seemed ridiculous. How could anyone possibly tame such deadly creatures? The very thought seemed absurd. But as Dr. Martinez delved deeper, she realized there was a possibility. The apex predators might not be as mindless as everyone thought. They might have instincts, behavioral patterns that could be studied and manipulated. If humans could understand these creatures, they might stand a chance. But even Dr. Martinez wasn't sure. The predators were unlike anything anyone had ever encountered. They weren't animals. They were monsters designed for war. And yet, as the days passed, more and more pieces of the puzzle began to fit together. The predators had to be more than just killing machines. They had to be something else, something that could be reasoned with, or at least controlled. With nothing left to lose, Dr. Martinez proposed an unthinkable idea. What if they could use a form of communication with the predators? What if they could communicate with their instincts, their very essence? The idea was revolutionary, but it was their only hope. If they could somehow establish a bond with the predators, then maybe they could find a way to turn the tide of the war. But that would require understanding the creatures on a level that no human had ever imagined. And it would mean taking a risk that could either save humanity or doom it forever. The world was running out of time. The predators continued to ravage the earth, and humanity was struggling to survive. The situation had never been more dire. It was do or die. The only question now was, would humanity rise to the challenge, or would they become nothing more than the prey of the apex predators? The answer lay with a few brave souls, hidden deep in underground labs, who were about to embark on a mission unlike any other. They were about to attempt the impossible, to communicate with the very creatures that had come to destroy them. Would they succeed? Or would this be the final chapter in humanity's history? The world held its breath, waiting for the answer. Dr. Elena Martinez sat in the dimly lit lab, surrounded by piles of data, ancient texts, and holographic images of the apex predators. Her eyes were bloodshot from days without sleep, but there was no time for rest. She had found something in the research, something that could change everything. A method, an ancient technique used to communicate with wild beasts. It was a long shot, but it was humanity's last hope. She paced back and forth, thinking through the possibilities. The predators weren't like any creatures Earth had ever known. Their intelligence was almost on par with human beings, and their physical power was beyond anything that even the most advanced military technology could match. They didn't simply tear through buildings. They decimated entire ecosystems, leaving nothing behind but death and ruin. The idea that these creatures could be reasoned with, let alone controlled, seemed absurd, but the patterns were undeniable. The legends, the old texts from different cultures, all spoke of taming creatures that were once thought to be unstoppable. The connection was there. She just had to figure out how to make it work, but there was a problem. The predators weren't like the animals humans had tamed in the past. This wasn't about breaking a wild horse or training a dog. These were apex predators, born to hunt, and they had no reason to listen to anyone. Still, the only way forward was through understanding, and understanding meant tapping into something deeper, something primal. Elena's mind wandered back to the ancient texts. Some of them were from civilizations long gone, cultures that had existed before recorded history, yet they all shared one thing in common. They spoke of a bond between humans and beasts, a bond built not on force, but on mutual respect and understanding. The idea of using mental connection, a form of telepathy or psychic bond, had always seemed like fantasy. But Alina had seen enough to believe that maybe there was something to it. The predators' behavior, their interactions with one another, suggested a level of communication beyond what was visible on the surface. The method wasn't fully developed. No one had ever attempted to control creatures as powerful as these. Alina, however, was determined to try. She had nothing left to lose. The rest of the world was crumbling around her, and there was a chance that this could be the key to stopping the predators. But could she trust her instincts? Could this theory actually work? She glanced at the monitor. It displayed the most recent data on the creatures. Massive, hulking beings with glowing eyes, sharp claws, and thick, armor-like skin. They were intelligent, yes, but also incredibly dangerous. One wrong move, one false step, and Alina knew they could all be doomed. And yet she couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't just mindless killers. There had to be more to them. The key was in understanding how they communicated. Alina thought about the few survivors who had reported strange encounters with the predators. They all spoke of moments where the creatures hesitated, moments where they didn't attack immediately. It was as if they were assessing, calculating. Could it be that the apex predators weren't just killing machines, but complex beings with their own thoughts and reasoning? Alina's hands trembled as she tapped a few commands into the lab's system, pulling up data on the strange, ancient ritual that she believed could help her. According to the texts, it was a method of communication that went beyond physical signals. It was about connecting on a mental, even spiritual level, drawing on the natural instincts shared between humans and animals. If the predators could be brought into this connection, perhaps they could be controlled. Maybe they could become allies, not enemies. It was a crazy idea, but it was the only idea they had. Her team was already working on the device that would allow her to establish this connection. It wasn't much, just a crude mental interface linked to neural sensors, but it was all they had. The world's best minds had been working for days on the project, but they were running out of time. Each passing moment meant more destruction. The predators weren't waiting, and neither could they. Alina took a deep breath. The device was ready. It was time to test it. The first test subject was a small, seemingly docile creature, one of the apex predators captured in a remote area after a massive battle. It had been injured and brought to the facility under heavy guard. Despite its size and strength, it had been subdued, though not without great difficulty. The creature was kept in a high-security containment area, and Alina had never seen anything like it up close. The sheer power emanating from the beast was terrifying. Its glowing eyes followed her every move, but it didn't attack. There was a strange intelligence behind those eyes, a calculating look that unsettled her. "Alina, are you sure about this?" One of her colleagues, Dr. Ivan Choi, asked nervously. He was standing behind her, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. Alina didn't answer immediately. She stared at the predator, trying to make sense of it. She had to do this. She had to prove that communication could work. "Unsure," she said quietly, her voice steady despite the fear building in her chest. "It's the only way." With a shaky hand, she connected the neural interface to her head. The wires felt cold against her skin as they clicked into place, and the machine hummed to life. The device would amplify her brainwaves and, in theory, allow her to establish a mental connection with the predator. It was risky, untested, but she had no other choice. The predator in the cage moved, and for the first time, Alina felt a sharp pang of fear. It wasn't just the raw power of the creature that terrified her. It was the unknown. Could this work? Could she actually communicate with it? Taking a deep breath, she closed her eyes, reaching out mentally. She focused on the creature, on its instincts, on its presence. She could feel its thoughts, or at least she could feel the vibrations of its mind. It wasn't like speaking. There were no words. It was more like an intense, primal connection, like trying to touch a force of nature. The predator's mind was vast and wild, untamed, But there was something there, something that felt almost familiar. Then, as if in response, the predator's mind brushed against hers. Alina froze. It wasn't violent or threatening, just a strange, overwhelming sensation of power. The predator was aware of her, aware that she was trying to make contact. For a long moment, the two of them stood locked in that strange mental space, and then, just as quickly as it had begun, the connection broke. Alina staggered back, her heart racing, her breath shallow. The predator let out a low, rumbling growl, its eyes flashing. But it didn't charge. It didn't attack. It had heard her. Alina felt a wave of relief wash over her. It was working. But the hardest part was still ahead of her. This was only the beginning. She had made contact, but now she had to build trust. She had to establish control. And she had no idea what the next step would be. But there was no turning back now. The days that followed the first successful contact with the apex predator felt like both a victory and a terrifying gamble. Alina couldn't stop thinking about the connection. The way the creature had sensed her presence, had acknowledged her. It was an unsettling feeling, knowing that she had touched the mind of something so powerful, so dangerous. Yet there was something about it that made her believe in the possibility of a solution, perhaps even a way to end the war that raged across the planet. But the success of the first connection was only the beginning, and Alina knew that. The predators were not only more powerful than any human force, but also unpredictable in ways that couldn't be anticipated. The connection, while profound, wasn't enough. It was like trying to tame an ocean with a single wave. The predators were creatures born for destruction, and no amount of understanding could change the fact that they were still creatures of instinct, ruled by hunger, rage, and an insatiable need for dominance. Alina spent the next several days experimenting, refining the neural connection, and analyzing the data collected from the predator's reactions. She couldn't afford to be reckless, to dive too deep too soon. This was a dangerous game she was playing, one that could either save humanity or lead to its complete annihilation. Every interaction, every moment she spent connected to the creature, she was learning something new. But every new discovery also brought with it fresh dangers. The next predator they brought in was even more dangerous, more resistant to the connection. It was a larger creature, with dark, jagged scales that reflected the dim light of the laboratory, and its eyes glowed with an unnerving intensity. It had been captured after it had torn through several military bases, leaving nothing but scorched earth in its wake. The creature's reputation preceded it. It was the most ferocious of all the predators. When they brought it into the lab, it snarled and bared its teeth, its massive claws scratching at the containment barriers. Alina stood before the creature, watching it through the thick glass, heart pounding. This one wouldn't be easy. She knew that, but she couldn't afford to be afraid. If she failed here, everything they had worked for would come to a crashing halt. She had to get inside its mind. She had to make the connection work. The team was ready. The neural interface was set up, and the lab was filled with a tense energy. Dr. Choi and the other scientists stood behind her, eyes wide with apprehension. Alina gave them a look that she hoped conveyed calm, though inside, she was anything but. The creature's growls vibrated through the air as she connected the interface to her own mind. This time, Alina prepared herself differently. She wasn't just trying to make a fleeting connection. She had to make it stick. The predator's mind was like a storm, raw, chaotic, and wild. She had to find a way to tame it, even if just for a moment, to understand it. She closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and reached out. It was as if the air itself crackled with energy. The moment her consciousness touched the creature's, she was bombarded by waves of fury and aggression. Its thoughts weren't like anything she had ever encountered. It wasn't just a beast. It was a force, an entity of pure hunger. The predator's mind was filled with thoughts of battle, of the hunt of survival. Alina could feel its primal instincts clawing at her, trying to break through her mental defenses. She focused, pushing through the onslaught of violent thoughts, trying to establish some form of communication. But it wasn't easy. The creature wasn't interested in conversation. It didn't understand the concept of negotiation. For it, there was only the hunt. And humans were nothing more than prey. Alina's pulse quickened as she fought to hold on to the connection. She had to find a way to make it listen, to make it see her not as a threat, but as something more. She thought of the techniques she had studied, the old legends of taming beasts, of connecting with their instincts. She couldn't just fight it. She had to appeal to something deeper, something primal. In the depths of its mind, she found a flicker, something that wasn't pure aggression. It was a memory, a flash of something familiar. She clung to it, reaching deeper into the creature's psyche. It wasn't much, but it was enough to make a difference. She used it, focused on that memory, and gently pulled the predator's attention away from its violent impulses. For a moment, everything went still. The growls ceased. The storm in the predator's mind quieted. Alina's heart raced, but she didn't dare open her eyes. She had no idea how long this would last, whether the creature would pull away, or whether it would allow her to establish a deeper connection. Then, slowly, the predator's thoughts began to shift. They weren't violent or chaotic. Instead, there was a strange clarity, a focus that hadn't been there before. It was as though the creature was listening to her, or at least trying to understand her. Alina allowed herself to breathe, just for a moment, as the tension in her shoulders eased. But the connection wasn't perfect. It wasn't stable. She could feel the predator's mind tugging, trying to break free from her influence, but something had changed. The connection was fragile, but it was there. "Can you hear me?" Alina whispered, though she knew the creature couldn't understand words. She wasn't sure what would happen next, but she had made progress. The predator wasn't attacking. It was listening. She withdrew slowly, breaking the connection. The creature's eyes narrowed, its growls returning in low, rumbling waves. But this time, it wasn't as violent. It was as if it recognized her, or at least knew she wasn't an immediate threat. Alina's mind felt foggy, exhausted from the intense mental strain, but she was exhilarated. She had done it. She had gotten through. "I think it's working," she said quietly, almost to herself. Dr. Choi leaned in, watching the creature carefully. "Are you sure? It's not attacking, but we're still not safe." Alina nodded. "We're not safe, but we've made progress. This one listens. We just need time." As the team prepared to gather data from the session, Alina's mind raced. The connection had been brief, but it was proof. The predators weren't entirely beyond reach. They weren't mindless killing machines. They had intelligence, instincts, and even memories. And that meant there was a chance, just a slim chance, that humanity could turn the tide. But the hardest part was yet to come. She had made a crack in their armor, but now she had to figure out how to break it wide open. The world was watching, waiting for a miracle. And in the silence of the lab, Alina couldn't shake the feeling that the real battle was just beginning. The weeks that followed the successful connection with the apex predators were a blur of progress and setbacks. The world outside the lab continued to crumble, entire nations falling to the relentless assault of the creatures. The skies, once clear and peaceful, were now filled with the smoke of burning cities. The ground shook beneath humanity's feet, and in the distance, the sound of chaos echoed across the globe. But inside the research facility, there was a sense of urgency, a quiet hope that humanity might still find a way to fight back. Alina spent every waking hour analyzing the data collected from the neural connections. Each session brought new insights into the behavior of the predators, revealing just how deeply ingrained their instincts were. These creatures were not simply machines of destruction. They were living beings with complex thoughts and emotions, driven by a need for survival and dominance. There were moments when Alina wondered if they were anything like humans at all, except for the fact that their survival came at the expense of others. But could they be swayed? Could their destructive urges be tempered? The answer wasn't clear, but Alina was determined to find out. She had made contact, but the question that lingered was, could she control them? The next experiment was the most dangerous one yet. Alina had learned that each apex predator had different traits and personalities, despite their similar appearances. Some were more aggressive, while others were more calculated in their movements. Some seemed to harbor a strange curiosity toward the humans in the lab, as if they were trying to figure out what made them tick. Others were pure rage, driven by a primal instinct to destroy. This time, Alina would attempt a direct connection with one of the most unpredictable and dangerous predators, a massive armored creature that had torn through several military outposts without hesitation. Its skin was like living metal, glinting in the artificial light of the containment cell. It stood at nearly 12 feet tall, its eyes glowing with an ominous red hue. This creature was known for its brutal efficiency, and its size alone made it an overwhelming force. Alina felt a knot of anxiety form in her stomach as she stood in front of the glass barrier, staring into the creature's eyes. It was an unsettling experience, knowing that one misstep could cost her everything. She could feel the energy radiating from it, a silent promise of destruction if given the chance. But she also felt something else, something far subtler. There was an intelligence behind those glowing eyes, a flicker of something more than mere instinct. Alina took a deep breath and turned to her team. They were all present, watching her with a mixture of fear and anticipation. No one had dared to try this before. The connection she had made with the other predators had been a breakthrough. But this creature was different. It wasn't just a physical threat. It was a force of nature. If it resisted, if it broke free, the entire facility would be in danger. "Are you sure about this?" Dr. Choi asked, his voice tense. Alina didn't answer immediately. She didn't have the luxury of second-guessing herself. "We don't have a choice," she replied. "We need to understand them more. We need to gain control." The neural interface was already connected to her, its sensors humming softly as they calibrated. The team had been working around the clock to refine the system, hoping it could withstand the power of a creature like this. Alina's hands trembled slightly as she adjusted the interface, feeling the cold metal of the wires against her skin. She couldn't afford to show fear. Not now. Without saying another word, she stepped forward, activating the connection. The lab fell into an eerie silence as Alina closed her eyes, her mind already reaching out. She could feel the creature's presence immediately, like a force crashing against her consciousness. It was unlike anything she had felt before. The predator's thoughts were overwhelming, a violent storm of aggression and dominance. But there was something else, something deeper beneath the surface. A part of it was curious, confused, as if it couldn't comprehend why Alina was here, why it was being called upon. Alina steadied her breath, her pulse racing as she fought to maintain the connection. She had to focus. She had to push through the violent surge of emotions crashing against her mind. She had felt similar resistance with the first predator, but this was on a different level entirely. The creature was testing her, pushing back, trying to assert its dominance. For a moment, Alina lost control. The connection became a blur of fear and violence, and she felt herself being pulled into the storm. It was like drowning in an ocean of rage. But then, she remembered something. Something she had read in the ancient texts. The key to taming the wild beast was not through force, but through patience and understanding. It wasn't about overpowering the predator. It was about showing it that she wasn't a threat, that they were connected. Alina reached deep inside herself, using everything she had learned. She focused on the creature's instincts, its primal need for control, and instead of fighting it, she tried to mirror it. She matched the beast's energy, not in violence, but in understanding. She offered it a simple truth. She wasn't here to destroy it. She wasn't here to fight. The shift came slowly, like a gentle tide washing away the storm. The creature's mind quieted, the fury and aggression receding just enough for Alina to take a deeper look. She could see the complexity in its thoughts now, the patterns of its movements, the strategy behind its attacks. It wasn't just a mindless killer. It was a creature with purpose, and in that purpose, there was room for a new connection. Alina's breath caught in her throat as the predator's thoughts turned toward her, not with violence, but with an unsettling calm. It wasn't submission, but it was understanding. The predator was recognizing her not as prey, but as something else, something it could not fully comprehend. For a moment, Alina let herself believe they were on the verge of something monumental. Maybe she had made the breakthrough they needed. Maybe they could turn the tide. But as quickly as the connection had formed, the creature's mind withdrew. The calmness vanished, replaced by a sudden burst of energy, a primal warning. Alina stumbled back, gasping for air, the interface disconnecting as the creature growled in agitation. It wasn't quite ready yet, she realized. The bond she had made was fragile, and the predator had sensed it. It still didn't trust her. The teen rushed to her side, but Alina held up a hand to stop them. Her head was spinning, and her body was drenched in sweat, but the connection had shown her something crucial. The predator hadn't attacked, but it hadn't accepted her either. The battle for control wasn't over. It had only just begun. "We're not done yet," Alina said, her voice shaky but determined. "But we're closer than we've ever been. I can feel it. We just need more time." Outside the lab, the world continued to burn. The apex predators were everywhere, destroying, hunting, wiping out humanity. But within these walls, a small team of scientists had come closer than anyone ever thought possible to changing the tide. Alina knew the risks were enormous, but she also knew they had no other choice. Time was running out, and she was ready to face whatever came next. The days following the failed connection with the armored predator were marked by an even greater sense of urgency. The world outside the research facility continued to crumble, and humanity was on the brink of extinction. Cities fell one by one, and the remaining military forces, though valiant, were utterly ineffective against the sheer power of the apex predators. As the team worked around the clock, Alina felt the weight of their mission heavier than ever. She knew time was running out, and every moment spent in the lab was another moment the world was being torn apart. Alina spent the next several days reviewing the data, looking for patterns that could help her understand what went wrong during the last experiment. Despite the brief moment of understanding she had felt, the predator had pulled back with a violent surge, as though it had realized how vulnerable it had become. Something in the way she had approached the connection had triggered that resistance. The creature hadn't fully accepted her, and that had cost them dearly. But Alina didn't allow herself to wallow in failure. There was no time for that. The answer was still out there, somewhere, buried beneath the surface of those powerful, untamed minds. The key, she realized, was to stop thinking about the predators as mere animals to be controlled. They were something more. They were beings that thrived on instinct and strength. Yes, but they also had the capacity to think, to strategize, to feel. If she could learn how to tap into that part of them, the part that wasn't just bloodlust and rage, perhaps she could make the breakthrough they needed. Her team had been working tirelessly on refining the neural interface, trying to make it more robust, more capable of handling the immense power of the predators' minds. They had upgraded the equipment, making it more stable, more resistant to the violent mental surges that had previously threatened to overwhelm Alina's own consciousness. It wasn't perfect, but it was the best they had, and it had to work. On the 6th day after the failed connection, Alina was ready for another attempt. The creature they would connect with this time was different from the others. This one was smaller, though still incredibly dangerous. It had been found near a remote outpost, silently stalking the survivors who had dared to take refuge there. Unlike the other predators, this one had a strange level of caution. It was a calculating creature, one that didn't simply charge into battle, but observed, analyzed, and struck when the moment was right. It was far more intelligent than the others, and that made it even more dangerous. Standing in front of the containment glass, Alina felt the familiar flutter of anxiety in her stomach. This creature wasn't the unstoppable force the previous one had been. This one was smart, and smart meant it was even harder to predict. Elena knew that in order to make this connection work, she would have to approach it differently. She couldn't rush in like before. The key was patience, understanding, and above all, respect for the predator's intelligence. She turned to her team, her face set in determination. "This is it," she said, her voice steady but filled with resolve. "If we can't connect with this one, then we'll have no other choice but to admit that they're too far beyond us. But I believe we can. We have to." Dr. Choi, standing next to her, nodded silently. He had seen her succeed before, and he had seen her fail. The line between victory and disaster was razor thin, and they all knew it. Still, he had faith in her ability to push through, to find a way when there seemed to be none. Elena stepped forward, her hands gripping the sides of the neural interface as it was securely fastened to her head. The device was designed to amplify and focus her brainwaves, allowing her to establish a more stable connection with the predator. She took a deep breath, her chest rising and falling with each inhale, focusing her mind. She couldn't afford to hesitate. This was humanity's last chance. The predator inside the containment cell was watching her, its sharp eyes following her every movement. It had a sleek, almost feline body, its muscles coiled like springs. The creature's fur was dark, almost black, and its eyes shone with an unnatural, intelligent gleam. Elena locked eyes with it for a moment, trying to gauge its thoughts. It didn't charge like the others. It didn't growl. Instead, it stood there, its head slightly tilted, as if considering her presence. This was different. Elena nodded to her team, and the connection began. The first few moments were filled with an almost overwhelming sense of tension. The creature's mind surged forward like a wave, pushing against Elena's consciousness. It wasn't a violent surge like the last one, but a subtle, intelligent probing. It was trying to understand her, testing her resolve, its mind as sharp as its claws. Elena closed her eyes and focused. She reached out mentally, touching the creature's thoughts as gently as she could, trying to make contact without overwhelming it. She could feel the predator's curiosity, its suspicion. It wasn't attacking, but it wasn't submitting either. It was trying to assess her, to determine if she was a threat or something else. She let the connection build slowly, carefully. Instead of pushing back against the predator's probing thoughts, she allowed herself to be open, to receive its signals. She focused on its mental state, searching for the deeper currents of thought beneath the surface. There was something there, something fragile, something almost human. The predator's thoughts were sharp and direct. It didn't have the emotional complexity of a human, but it was driven by an unmistakable sense of intelligence. The creature was not just a predator. It was a strategist, an observer. It was considering her, thinking, processing. There was a faint thread of curiosity in its thoughts now, and Elena grasped onto it like a lifeline. She spoke, though she knew it couldn't understand her words. She spoke through thought, through the bond they were creating. "I'm not here to harm you. We are the same. We both want to survive." The creature's thoughts shifted, and Elena felt its confusion. It was still unsure, still testing her. But for the first time, there was no violence, no immediate urge to tear her apart. There was only a sense of calculation. Slowly, Elena withdrew, giving the predator space to process the connection. She could feel its mind retreating, not in fear, but in contemplation. She had made a breakthrough, but it was small, fragile. The connection was unstable, but it was there. The predator's eyes flickered for a moment, and Elena took that as a sign. She had reached it. She had made contact. It wasn't the breakthrough she had hoped for, but it was progress. She opened her eyes, blinking against the sudden light of the lab. She felt exhausted, her body drained from the mental strain, but there was a quiet satisfaction in her chest. It wasn't a victory yet, but it was the beginning of one. They had crossed a line they hadn't thought possible. The creature wasn't just a force to be feared anymore. It was something they could work with. Elena stepped back from the interface, her mind still reeling from the experience. "We've done it," she said, her voice hoarse. "It's not over, but we've made the connection. Her team watched in stunned silence, unsure of what to say. They had all felt the weight of their mission, the sense that they were on the edge of something monumental. But none of them had expected this kind of breakthrough. Elena took a deep breath, her gaze turning toward the containment cell. The predator inside wasn't just a beast anymore. It was something more. And now, humanity had a chance to change the rules of the game. But that chance came with a price. The battle for control was far from over, and Elena knew it was just a matter of time before they would have to face the true consequences of their actions. The weeks that followed the breakthrough with the apex predator were a blur of rapid development and escalating tension. Humanity's fragile hope now rested on a thread of connection, one that had never before been attempted and that no one could predict the outcome of. Inside the research facility, Elena and her team worked tirelessly to refine their neural link with the predators, attempting to unlock the full potential of what had begun as a mere experiment. But with each passing day, the pressure grew heavier. Outside the facility, the world was falling apart. Nations crumbled, their military forces overwhelmed by the relentless might of the apex predators. Survivors, holed up in makeshift shelters, whispered of humanity's last stand. There were rumors that the predators were not just destroying. They were hunting for something, tracking down the remnants of human civilization with an uncanny precision. It was as if they knew that the end of humanity was inevitable and that nothing could stop it. But inside the facility, Elena's team was determined to prove otherwise. They had made contact with the creatures, and though the connection was fragile, it was something they could build upon. The first predator they had connected with, the calculating one, hadn't attacked. It hadn't fully accepted them either, but it was aware of their presence. It understood that they were not enemies in the traditional sense, and that, Elena believed, was a glimmer of hope. It was time to test their progress. On the 8th day after the successful connection, Elena and her team prepared for the most critical experiment yet. They had learned so much from their previous interactions with the apex predators. The team had modified the neural interface, made it stronger, more stable. The goal was to form a deeper bond, one that would allow them to not just control the creatures but to communicate with them, to establish a level of cooperation. If they succeeded, the predators would be a powerful ally. If they failed, it could mean the end of everything. Elena walked to the containment area, where the next predator waited. This one was different from the previous ones. It was larger, its dark scales gleaming under the artificial lights. The creature had been the first to wreak havoc on a human settlement. Its sheer size and strength had overwhelmed anything in its path. But Elena knew that its brute force was not the only thing that made it dangerous. It was intelligent, like the others, but it had been shaped by its years of destruction. Its mind was full of anger, rage, and confusion. Yet there was something else, something buried deep within it, that Elena could sense: fear. As the team gathered around her, Elena glanced at the predator through the reinforced glass. It paced back and forth, its massive body moving with the grace of a predator. But there was a wariness to its actions. It was calculating, weighing its options, unsure of what to make of the humans watching from behind the glass. "Are we sure about this?" Dr. Choi asked quietly, his voice filled with a mix of concern and hope. Elena turned to him, her expression resolute. "We don't have any other choice. This is our last chance." The air in the lab was thick with tension. Everyone knew what was at stake. The neural interface was connected to her once more, ready to link her mind with the creatures. But this time, the stakes were higher. If this connection failed, it could mean disaster, not just for Elena, but for the entire facility. The predator was calm, but Elena could feel the agitation underneath its stillness. She reached for the console, her fingers trembling slightly. She had to remain steady. She had to remain calm. With a deep breath, she activated the interface. Immediately, she was thrust into the predator's mind. The connection was powerful, like a floodgate opening, but this time it was different. The predator's thoughts were not chaotic or purely driven by instinct. There was a method to its rage, a reason behind its actions. It was thinking, planning, calculating. It knew that it was in control. And it knew that it was being watched. The first wave of emotions hit Alina with a force she had never experienced before. The predator's mind was a whirlpool of violence, pain, and fear, its instincts warring against its intelligence. Alina felt the creature's unease, its hesitation, as if it wasn't sure whether to trust her or to break free. She braced herself against the mental onslaught, steadying her breathing. She spoke through the link, her thoughts calm but firm. "I'm not your enemy. We can work together. We both want to survive." For a moment, there was nothing, no response, just an eerie silence. Alina continued to reach out, focusing on the predator's thoughts. She could feel its confusion, its distrust. It wasn't fully aware of what she wanted, but there was a flicker of understanding deep within it, something primal yet not entirely without reason. "We have a choice. Help us, and we'll help you. Together, we can stop this." The predator's thoughts surged again, stronger this time, but there was a new quality to them. Alina didn't pull away, even as she felt her mental and physical limits being pushed. She couldn't let go. Not now. She needed the connection to strengthen, to evolve. And then, it happened. A single thought broke through the flood of violence and fear. Why? Alina felt a jolt of recognition. It was a question. One that came from a place of curiosity, not aggression. The predator was asking why she was trying to connect, why she wasn't fighting. It was almost human. She answered as gently as she could, "Because we are not so different. We both seek survival, but we can do more if we work together." The predator's thoughts swirled around her like a storm, and for a moment, Alina thought it might all fall apart. But then, there was a shift. The anger, the fear, the confusion, they began to subside. The predator was no longer just a machine of destruction. It was something more. It had thoughts, desires, needs that went beyond mere violence. Alina felt a connection, tenuous but undeniable, as the predator began to lower its guard. It wasn't fully trusting her yet, but it was listening. It was considering her words. The connection was still unstable, fragile, but it was there. Alina opened her eyes, gasping for breath. As the connection snapped, she stumbled back, her legs unsteady as the weight of the experience hit her all at once. The teen rushed to her side, but she raised her hand to stop them. "It worked," she said, her voice hoarse, but filled with an undeniable sense of relief. "It's not perfect, but it's a start." Dr. Choi looked at her with disbelief. "You actually made contact." Alina nodded slowly. "I did." The predator didn't attack. It's confused, but it's willing to listen. The lad was silent, the enormity of what had just happened sinking in. They had made progress, yes, but it was only the beginning. The predators were still dangerous, still a force to be reckoned with, and there was no telling how long their fragile connection would hold. Alina knew that this was just a small victory in a much larger war. The world outside was still collapsing. Humanity's future was still in jeopardy, but for the first time in a long while, she felt a glimmer of hope. They were no longer fighting alone. The predators, once thought to be humanity's doom, might now be the key to their survival. But as Alina looked out at the containment area, she couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the calm before the storm. They had made contact, yes, but the true test was still to come. The predators were powerful, unpredictable, and they weren't the only ones that could change the course of the war.